Hi. Hi again. My name is Jason Radford, the CEO for Volunteer Science. Today I'm going to talk about recruiting participants for your online lab. We're going to talk about volunteers, students in a lab, crowd workers, the whole 9 yards. The point here is for you to understand all the different ways that you can recruit subjects, the way that you can keep their contact information and keep them engaged on the long haul, and all the little tricks of the trade for getting people to take your studies using volunteer science. And in full disclosure, I am the CEO of Volunteer Science, the company. Our company is meant to ensure the long-term survival of this platform, and so that's why that's why things are the way that they are. So, without further ado, we're going to talk about a couple of different headline strategies. One is using social media. Your Facebook followers and Twitter followers, your Facebook friends and Twitter followers, to recruit subjects. Building out a large email list of people that you've contacted before or that you know and you can reach out to. Talk about the ambassadors or an ambassador program that we've created that we really try to pilot here. Crowd workers, so paying folks to come and participate through some platforms like Mechanical Turk and Prolific. And then we're going to talk about online ads. So using Facebook ads, Google ads, and in general, we'll also talk about some physical ads as well for recruiting subjects. So, all right. So a quick preamble. There are plenty of good ways to recruit subjects right now, and I'm not going to spend too much time sort of criticizing the physical lab. There are plenty of criticisms to go around. I think really, if you're doing online studies, I think you still should consider the physical lab for a couple of reasons. One, it's actually easy to pay people. If you're doing Mechanical Turk, it can be difficult to make sure that people are doing the right thing or that they understand instructions well, and so you can end up paying people for bad data. It happens. It's easy in a physical lab to make sure that people are participating and that you pay them for their time. The subjects are also sort of well behaved. They tend to pay attention. They tend to complete the studies. They follow the instructions, and when they have questions, they can raise their hand and ask you those questions. So you can answer them as it's going on. Whereas if you're doing stuff online, it may not be that easy to address people's issues. And lastly, they are a reliable source of subjects, so people do show up. They come, they participate, they leave. It's a very easy way to go in and have a group of people that you can go to get subjects. If you have access to a physical lab, that is, of course. So they're really good for group experiments. Again, because they tend to complete a study, they're good for studies where you have more than one person. Because if you have, say, like 5 people, and 1 in 5 people ends up leaving a study or not completing the study in a group, then that means that every other group or so is going to create some bad data. You're not going to have data that's usable if 1 out of the 5 people leave. So they're really good for group experiments. They're good for challenging studies. So like if you need people to do something really complicated or something that lasts a long time or where people really do need a lot of help, you definitely do want to do the physical lab there to make sure that people understand what's going on and can do whatever challenging work needs to be done. The other thing too with the challenging studies is if people are doing sort of emotionally strenuous tasks like coding hate speech or coding offensive material, having people there in person to help them process information or who is on hand to help them deal with that kind of material. Doing traditional subjects in a lab or physically around can be good, or it's probably better to do that way. Long duration studies, so the longer you go, the more likely the people will leave. So having people in a physical lab helps for really long studies. Similarly, if you want people to come back for your study, the physical lab can help. And lastly, I consider quote-unquote wet studies. If you need to collect saliva or blood samples, like other kinds of physical data, you again would want to use a traditional subject pool for that. You can, again, supplement the online lab with traditional subjects so you can still have them do online studies, but then bringing them in for the wet part of the research. The other sort of way of doing traditional subjects is in a classroom. So you go to a faculty member's class, and you do your study there, maybe do a lecture about what the study is about, and that's how you collect your data. The idea there is that you have a captive audience, so people are much more likely to finish. They also tend, again, to be well behaved, and in this case, the classroom, they tend to be a cheap source of subjects. Like you don't have to pay. You typically don't have to pay them for participating in your study, though of course you should and you can. And again, they're good for group experiments, again, challenging studies, long duration studies, but also good for unfunded studies. If you don't have money for big groups, then you can go to classrooms. The big takeaway, for people who are not used to dealing with traditional subject methods, is just ask people. If you're not in the psychology department, just ask the psych department if you can participate or use your study in their lab. They can always say no, but if they say yes, you have your subjects. Same thing with classrooms. Ask a faculty member who's teaching classes that are relevant to the study that you're doing, and see if you can use their classrooms. Okay, so having said all that, let's talk about recruiting volunteers. So a lot of this will be based on our experience of recruiting volunteers. So we have our social media. I break the social media down into two. One is like you build your own community of people on social media. So we have our Facebook page and we have our Twitter feed, and we try to post content there. We say, we got a new study. We post it to those pages, and people come in, and people like our page, follow the Twitter profile. Generally, I think our rates so far have been around 1 to 5% of our followers or likes will actually reply or follow a link to a study. And this has changed substantially over time, especially on Facebook. The number of people who see a Facebook post has actually dramatically decreased over time. So it's one of those things where I kind of warn people away from creating Facebook pages, because just because you get likes on your Facebook page and people follow your Facebook page does not mean that people actually will see your Facebook posts, and that has actually gotten worse over time. So I sort of raise a red flag with using Facebook as a means for subject recruitment. But if you got Twitter, you can, say you're doing a psychological study in, how quickly people respond to stimuli around, we'll say slavery. So we have a friend or a researcher who's done this, looking at how people respond to images of slavery. You can post that onto Twitter and say, tag a couple of institutions that study slavery or researchers who study race, and you can get them to retweet or share or otherwise coordinate some sort of subject recruitment. So they share it among their friends, and their friends share it among their friends, and you build a subject sample or a sample out of that. The second thing you do is you can go into existing communities and advertise. So there are a lot of people who don't know this, but Craigslist has a volunteer board. And if you ever go there, the volunteer board is filled with people looking for scientific subjects. And it's free to post for these volunteer opportunities on Craigslist. So certainly go to the Craigslist for your city and post for people to take your study. You can also post in the Craigslist for other cities, though these do get moderated. So it's not necessarily nice to, if you're in Boston like I am, to post for recruiting for a study in LA. If I don't have a study in LA, or if my study is not about Los Angeles, so be kind about that. And this sort of also goes for Reddit and other existing communities, which I'll get to sort of the high level takeaways from this in a minute. But in this case, for Craigslist, post in the relevant volunteer boards for your communities. The same thing sort of with Reddit. You want to post on subreddits that are relevant to your study. So it could be the subreddit for the university that you're at, the subreddit for the city that you're in, the subreddit for the topics that you're studying. Again, if you're studying slavery, you can go to some of those the subreddits on race and history and slavery, and try to recruit subjects there. There's also our sample size, the subreddit for posting surveys like this. There is a special subreddit that we like to use, the web games subreddit, where if you actually create a study that is a web game and you post it to our web games, it's actually a really great community because, one, the members there are really good about giving you feedback about your study. They get really engaged in the science of it. But you can also end up getting a ton of participants this way. It's a Reddit where there's a lot of users, but not a lot of really good content, not a lot of content in general. And so when we do a web games game, we can get between 2,000 and 5,000 people to participate in that game within a week. And actually can get anywhere between 500 and 1,000 people to participate in a game within the hour after publishing the study to that particular subreddit. So if you wanted to do groups, relatively small groups, you can actually do it through our web games. So a couple of general lessons about using social media to recruit volunteers. The first one is find your audience. Know who you're talking to, who you want to reach, why you want to reach them, how what you're doing fits with what they might be interested in. And when I say find your audience, I mean, think about the kind of person who would be interested in your study, whether it's learning about the thing that you're studying or interested in the kind of interface that you're creating or question that you're answering. Who do you think would really enjoy taking your study or contributing to the science that you're doing? Identify that person and then create good content for them. Share with them your most recent study, like the most recent publication, or share with them another publication in the area. Offer to do a little quick write-up about what the results mean for people, or what it would mean for the particular content or your area that you're doing your research in. Make it meaningful for those subjects. Also build multiple stages of interaction. So people aren't going to respond to the first post that you send, the first message that you send. So be prepared to, at every step from first message to second to third to when they show up to the study, making sure every one of those touch points has a degree of quality that reaches out to the audiences and engages them to keep them on track from seeing the message to starting the study to finishing it to getting the thank you and really knowing what the value of the study is. Next thing, definitely experiment on the cheap. So you will be trying different things, trying different messages. Don't spend a lot of time and a lot of energy on any one thing. You really won't know what's going to work with your audience until you actually start putting stuff out there. So don't spend $10,000 on a video ad if your budget for your study is $15,000. Put something slapdash together to see if it works. Because more likely than not, particularly as social scientists, you have no idea what's actually going to work. And we have very little training in doing this stuff effectively. So just assume that your first couple of attempts are going to fail. So experiment on the cheap. Don't burn all your money at once. And the last thing is track. You want to make sure that you're using Google Analytics, you're using Twitter Analytics to understand how many people are engaging in the content that you're publishing, and how many of those people are going from seeing a tweet to finishing the study. It's always going to be very small. No matter what, this is a very small funnel where you can reach 1,000 people, but one person's going to finish. And the reason I say track is because you want to know. On Facebook, it may be you may get 10%. On Twitter, you may get 2%. And if you are getting more traction on Facebook, you definitely want to be able to go back to that Facebook well or go back to that Reddit well and get more subjects. So, and you only know that if you track who clicks on the ad, or how many people are clicking on an ad, and how many people are going from that ad to, or not ad, the social media post to your study and actually finishing. And what I will say here, volunteers are not paid. Right? They're unpaid, that's why they're volunteers, but they're not free. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and you have to really be willing to put the work in. But volunteers are still very valuable. If you don't have research funding, most of the stuff that we do is not actually funded. We don't have a lot of budget for subjects. So a lot of what we do is just all volunteers because we can't afford to pay subjects. Did this out of order. Sorry. So advertising. We'll talk about advertising now. So if you do have money to do volunteers and you want to do advertising, there is a right way and a wrong way. There's definitely a wrong way. You can definitely lose your shirt trying to doing ads. So I'll give you two examples. Very early on, I think in 2014, when we first launched Volunteer Science, we did these Google AdWords where we did Google Ads and the Google search for online science experiments or science games, and we had some different ad content. And so we spent $2,000. I think we had a grant from the university to do this to just see how it would work. And those $2,000 we divided over 3 ads, ran them over a week, And we got 2 million impressions. 2 million people saw those ads, but we only got 2,000 people who clicked it, and then of those, 24 people actually finished the demographic survey, basically, that we wanted them to. So, we had a conversion rate of around $100 for a completion, which is way too many people, or way too much money for a subject. And at the end of the day, 24 valid observations was not enough data for us to publish anything from the study. So not only did we spend $100 per completion, but we didn't even get enough people to finish to actually publish anything worthwhile. The second thing that we did that failed is print advertising on Boston's Green Line. We did one small ad on that just for the platform itself. It says, come to volunteer science and participate in science, but do scientific research. And a couple of lessons there. It was very difficult to track. There was no unique URL. For anybody who's in this space, this is very standard. You would know this. We couldn't tell who was seeing the ad and who was then coming to the website. And we were actually looking at this in Google Analytics. We were saying how many people were coming to volunteer science who were on mobile devices during the time that we were running these ads, and it was just undetectable. There was no in aggregate. There was no increase in the number of people who were coming to volunteer science during that time. No increase in people from Boston. No aggregate increase for people on mobile apps. So there was we just couldn't tell if there was anything going on at all. And so the takeaway here is that ads require expertise and trial and error, and you can spend a ton of money and get nothing. So what I want to show you next is how you actually do it the right way. So we were actually, this past January, able to recruit 30,000 participants in 2 weeks at a cost of 30 to 50 cents per completion for a survey and then 2 psychological inventories. So it was actually a substantive thing that we were asking people to do. And we got 30,000 people all over the world to do it with an average rate of 50 cents for completion. So let me tell you how you do this right. Step 1 is you use ad tracking, which means for Facebook, this is the Facebook pixel. For Google, Google gives you this JavaScript snippet, which is exactly what Facebook pixel is, that tells Google or Facebook that the person actually did the thing that you wanted them to do. So if you want them to finish the survey, you put the pixel at the end of the survey or the snippet at the end of the survey, so that when they get to that page, you say, hey Google, this person finished, or hey Facebook, this person finished. And what that does is it allows Facebook and Google to know who actually did the thing that you're trying to do, and allows their machine learning algorithms to try and optimize on the people who are actually going to finish. If you don't use ad tracking, Facebook and Google and the other online ad services will only track the people who click on an ad. And that's a very bad signal on who's actually going to finish. There's a lot of people who just accidentally click on ads, or who click on ads and then find out that they're not interested in it, or that it's not what they thought it was. And so you really will just get a bunch of noise if you don't use the tracking. Second thing is, don't spend more than 20 or 40 bucks trying to experiment on a campaign. And by campaign, I mean the ad content and the audience that you're trying to reach. So if you have an ad and you want to try to see if it's going to appeal to people under 35 who are interested in social science, only spend about 20 bucks on that, unless you actually have a real large budget. But 20 bucks is usually enough to give you a sense of the order of magnitude of how much it's going to cost to get somebody for a particular ad campaign to work. So experiment on the cheap. This is going back to the lesson. Experiment on the cheap. The more money you spend, the more accurate it'll be, because over time, the more money you spend and the more time you give these systems, the better they get at predicting who's going to actually finish your study. So if you give more time, you'll actually get a better sense of the cost effectiveness of this. 20 or 40 bucks will give you sort of a high estimate of how expensive it's going to be. Next, we want to try a lot of different ads over a bunch of different audiences. You want to try a lot of stuff. And the reason for that is we're never going to know what ad's going to work for which audience. Sometimes people will respond to something that we think they're going to. Sometimes people respond to things that we had no idea what was going on. And you'll never know until you actually sort of put it out there. We've had ads that we thought would work In one audience, it would be like 50 cents per completion or a dollar per completion in one audience, and then $30 a completion for another one. And it's just, who knows why those things happen. But you want to be able to do that experimentation and test whether an ad works with a particular audience. And lastly, you want to target big audiences. Now, you don't want to be too big. You don't want to say like the whole world. So you want to say 35-year-olds with a social science degree, maybe, or you want to say like someone who's over 55 who resides in Boston. If you want to recruit somebody who's local, you want to point it in the right direction with a good specificity over what you're trying to recruit for. But you want to give the machine learning room to learn. You want to have thousands and thousands of people who say yes and no in order to train your machine learning algorithm to figure out which ones are the people who are most likely to do the study. So don't get super narrow. Okay, so that's the online ads. The next thing is building your own email list. So this is the one that I sort of support the most. As if you're going to do online research, I would suggest starting to build your email list as soon as possible, because you can always go back to it. It's the most reliable way of connecting with someone and keeping them engaged for a long period of time, so that as you have more studies that come out, or if you need people to come back, the email list is still the most powerful way of getting them to show back up. And so the idea here is you want to build as large an email list as possible of the subjects who fit what you're looking for. For us, we've got 40,000 people who volunteer, who's signed up and filled out our demographic survey. And when I send them an email, I get about 800 completions in the first day or two after sending it. And I usually get about 200 people within the first hour respond to these emails and actually do a study. Which is actually enough for us to do a decent group experiment. So, if you're trying to get an email list together for group experiments, you do need a lot of people to sign up for an email list. If you want to get 5 or 10 people to do a study together, it's got to be a big email list. But if you're looking to do just a one-off study with individuals doing a survey, you can certainly get by with a smaller email list. I think this is the only one, yeah. So one thing I will say here is, the social media campaigns, the ads, all of this stuff will feed the email list. The email list is sort of a catcher for everything else that you're doing. So certainly what I suggest is, as you're doing recruitment for any of your studies, have an email list at the end, or even at the beginning. I suggest do it at the beginning, because some people won't get to it at the end. Ask them at the beginning, would you want to participate in other studies, by me, the Professor so-and-so, or my lab, or whatever, and get them in panel in your email list early, so that you actually can go back to them later on. Okay, the other thing, I think this may be the last sort of volunteer-y one, is ambassadors. So the idea with the ambassadors here is you find volunteers who are really good at recruiting other people. And what we do for our volunteers, for our volunteer ambassadors, is we offer them training in doing this marketing stuff. For people who are younger than I am, this is really teaching them or helping them understand what social influence is, understanding how they build a reputation for, identifying students who are interested in. Or I say students because we do Northeastern students for the most part as ambassadors, and they typically recruit other students. But it's really about showing ambassadors how to identify people, who are interested in doing online experiments, or doing social science experiments, or learning about computer science, whatever your particular research is about, and helping them develop an ability to articulate the value of that research, articulate the value of that area of study, and actually then do the logistics around getting their friends or their family or their coworkers or their classmates, the people around them, to do it. So that's how we incentivize ambassadors to work with us. That's what they get out of it as volunteers. The results here are pretty good. So the people that volunteer, that the ambassadors recruit, tend to do the entire study. We have a high retention rate there. It's around like 95%. The only time ambassador volunteers don't finish is when there's something wrong with the study, when they experience some kind of fatal error somehow, which can be user error, but at the end of the day, like, it's very rare to happen. And it's also low cost. So once you have the ambassadors trained and once they know what they're doing with a particular study, they typically are very effective at getting people to recruit, or recruiting their friends and people around them. What I will say though is there are substantial ambassador logistic costs. So you do have to train the ambassadors on what the study is about, so that they know how to communicate it. You have to tell them how to spot errors and what to do in the case of errors. And generally, you have to do some training around like what the whole logistics of the study are. What link people have to click, what happens the entire time. What you don't want to do is train them on like answering questions or collecting data. I mean, you can, but the reason that you wouldn't want to do that is you don't want to make them a part of the quote-unquote research process, in which case they have to go through IRB vetting and they have to do the human subjects training, which again you can totally do. It's totally fine, but adds a substantial layer of logistical costs to getting ambassadors to help you recruit people. The last thing I want to mention is that ambassadors actually can also be used for incentivizing participants. It's very difficult to incentivize participants if you're not using the physical lab or if you're not using workers on Mechanical Turk. In part because you have to use like PayPal or Venmo or some other sort of cash system, which often doesn't make sense if you're paying people less than $5 or $10, or maybe even more than that. So if you're doing like a group experiment where people get more money, like an extra $1 or $2 for doing well in the experiment, it's a way of incentivizing people to do well in the experiment. Ambassadors are a good way of being able to just hand people a $5 bill or hand somebody an extra $2 bill, and then you just work with the ambassador to make sure that they write down the person's name for your for grant purposes or for IRB purposes, that you write down their name, the amount of money that they made, and that somebody in your research group or you are keeping track of the fact that like you gave the ambassador $50 and they wrote down 10 names, and there's suddenly $10 less. But you can go into the data and see there's 10 new people who participated. So ambassadors can be a good way of incentivizing participants in that small scale way. Okay, let's talk about crowd workers. So with crowd workers, we're talking about Mechanical Turk, Prolific, Figure 8, which is formerly Crowdflower. And these are typically people who are working online doing small, independent, individual tasks. So I think Mechanical Turk is the standard bearer here in the social sciences, and actually I think a lot of research, not just social science, where they have these things called human intelligence tasks, like filling out a survey would be a task, or tagging an image would be a task. And you post the HIT, human intelligence task, HIT is a hit. You post that online, and a Turker will say, hey, I'll do this hit. And they do it, they tag the images, or they take the survey, and then you pay them. Same thing happens on Prolific, same thing happens on Figure 8, Crowdflower. The difference mainly is that Prolific is dedicated for scientific research, whereas Mechanical Turk is anybody anywhere can post a hit. The hit can be anything from translations to tagging to just pointing and clicking and giving feedback on a website. And then the Figure 8 Crowdflower is mostly for machine learning type tasks, where people are doing translations or tagging or things like that. But that's what the crowd workers are and how they fit into research. You just say, hey, I need a survey done, and do 100 hits for 100 different participants. Or same thing with a group, like I need groups of 3 or groups of 5, and you sort of recruit a bunch of people all at once, and they start filling in your groups. Okay, so general lessons here. Because we're dealing with real money, you definitely want to pilot the thing first. So Mechanical Turk has a sandbox. Prolific doesn't have a sandbox feature, but you can still see. Actually, they may do now. They may have it now. But you want to make sure that your study works before actually spending money on people coming in and using it. So pilot test it first with a small number of workers in these systems. Um, you want to trust the data. Like most of the data is going to be good, but you want to verify, especially when you're dealing with systems like Mechanical Turk or Prolific, where they give you some data about subjects. So Mechanical Turk now has premium qualifications where presumably where they've done this demographic stuff and asked people their ages and their partisan affiliation and all this stuff. Um, and our experience is not 100% accurate. I haven't done this with Prolific, so I can't speak to how accurate Prolific's data are. But with Mechanical Turk, some of it's good, some of it's bad. But what I say is you want to trust it, but you want to verify. And so if you really care that somebody is liberal or conservative, you should ask in your demographic survey, are you a liberal or are you conservative? People tend to be pretty honest about this stuff. They're not, I don't know. It may be honesty, it may just be inaccuracy. They may have forgotten that they were working on an account where they said that they were conservative and they actually aren't. But you want to ask. If you really care about it, if that's an essential variable in your analysis, that's certainly essential enough to select on, you definitely want to ask people. So the big challenge with any of these crowd workers, because you're not around to see what's going on, is you don't know if people understand the instructions correctly. You don't know if they're just like clicking buttons, and you don't know. Particularly on Mechanical Turk, people are very savvy about creating bots to do Mechanical Turk work. I don't know how common this is among Prolific and Figure 8. Most of my experience is with Mechanical Turk, so I'll talk about that more than others. But you want to do checks to make sure that people are understanding what's going on, that they're paying attention, and that they're not robots. So the comprehension is mostly like quizzes. You give people instructions, and then you ask them questions about the instructions, and you make sure that they actually answer those correctly so they know what's going on. You do attention checks to make sure that people aren't just clicking, like, yes, no, whenever they see a question. And typically the attention check is like, read this paragraph and then answer the question, and then in the paragraph, like the last sentence or next to last sentence is, ignore everything I said, and just click blue, or just select the I don't care button. And that's usually what the attention check is. And then bot checks, what I've seen most people do is like do an open text box and ask people to put in like some sort of personal narrative or describe the room that they're in, or some kind of like open-ended data that's very short. You want to do something less personal than where you were born, but something that people can generally write out pretty quickly. And the thing is that bots just aren't good at creating these kind of open-ended texts. I mean, they can be good, but generally they're not. So you just want to put those in to make sure that you're working with people who are paying attention. The next thing is you want to pay people a decent amount. The worse you pay people, the more likely you are to get people the more likely you're to get people who are using bots. Just because the bot people are the only people who are willing to work for 50 cents an hour. So you want to pay people this amount. The other thing too is like you have a reputation on these platforms, and the more you pay, the better your reputation. That's one of the many things that goes into it. But the better your reputation, the more people are willing to, one, forgive any errors on your part, which is very important. Two, you're going to get higher quality people participating in your study. And three, like people are willing to work with you on like complicated things. So, pay goes a lot further than simply a fair wage. When you're calculating pay, you want to make sure that you take into account like how long it's going to take people to go through the consent process, the training, the orientation, the comprehension and attention and bot checks. Very often we forget that there's a lot of overhead time to the study, and we say like, oh, this is like a 5-minute survey, so I'm just going to pay people the dollar it would cost to do a $12 an hour for the 5 minutes. And so just remember when you're trying to estimate how much you want to pay these people, to take into account all that training time up front, as well as any kind of outro time. If you have some post-experiment questions, or you have a, what do you call it? When you do something deceptive, it's the, right, so when you do something deceptive, you're supposed to tell people what the deception was. I can't remember the name of that right now. but you want to include that time in it as well. And lastly, you definitely want to budget in money to pay for people who experience errors. The more complicated the experiments, like more technically complicated, the more likely you're going to experience errors, people who have problems. And if you have a group experiment, it's going to be much worse because, well, I don't know 100% of the reason why, but there are a lot of people who experience errors in group experiments, I think having to do with people who leave early or people who are using bots. But the more technically complex the study, the more likely you are to get messages from people that say, hey, I had a problem, hey, this thing didn't show up, or hey, this happened, I wasn't sure how that was supposed to work. So generally I say reserve around 10% of your budget for handling errors. So if you have 100 people and you're paying them $100, you have 100 people and you're paying one of them $1 a piece, I would say set aside about $10 to pay people who experience some kind of error. And the norm definitely is pay people who experience errors. If they are following up with you and they say, "Hey, this happened to me," whenever I go back and check, I see data there, it looks like they had a problem. So I don't know if I've ever really seen somebody who sent me some kind of error report who didn't actually do something. So just expect to pay people who report errors and save around 10% of your budget for that. I have it right here. So yes, I will say that most of my experience with Mechanical Turk, most of these sort of rules of thumb have to do with Mechanical Turk. Again, the main problem with Mechanical Turk is the low quality participation, which is not to say that all Turkers produce low quality data. It's not the case. I think in my experience, it's anywhere between 1 and 10% of hits, depending on the kind of study that we're doing. So not even the majority, the vast majority of Turkers are really willing to give you really good data and are working in good faith. The problem is, of course, trying to separate out the between 1 and 10% of people who aren't behaving so well, or who may just be tired. Who maybe have been working for a long time, or people who are experiencing some error. Errors happen in your system. If you're working online, servers may go down. Wi-Fi may get bad suddenly, and that may cause problems that you'd never foreseen. So the first lesson from Mechanical Turk is you definitely want to use the percent accepted and hits completed qualifications to screen out people who are using bot accounts. So the percent accepted qualification says, I only want Turkers who have 95% of their hits get accepted on average. Or you can set it whatever you want, 95, 97, 75. I think we use 95. But that and the hits completed qualification. So you want to make sure that they have a 95% or 99% or 90% acceptance rate and have at least, we use 100. They want to have at least 100 hits complete. And what that does, is it eliminates all of the people who are creating fake accounts or bot accounts early on. Because Mechanical Turk is very diligent about hunting these people out and making sure that people are working well and working in good faith. And so the people who are not tend to get weeded out early, but they still do it pretty regularly. So if you do those two qualifications, you can generally filter out most of the issues there. Again, expect an error rate of about 1% for something like a survey and 10% for a multi-person study. And lastly, there are some tricks for doing multi-person studies. With Mechanical Turk and with Prolific and with Crowdflower, you can sort of launch the hits and people will come. That's not necessarily the case with multi-person studies. I mean, it is the case with multi-person studies, but what you need is a lot of people to show up all at once. And so what we typically do is we oversubscribe our groups. So if we have a group of 3 or a group of 5, or we need groups of 3 or groups of 5 or groups of 10, and we need 10 groups of 5 or 50 groups of 5, typically what we will do is we will do between 5 to 10 times the number of people that we need in a group to get enough Turkers to show up. So if we need a group of 5, we will launch 25 to 50 hits to start off. And what will happen is, particularly Mechanical Turk, people reserve a hit, but they won't take it immediately. And so what you end up doing is you throw out 50 hits, people take them up immediately, but only 10 or 15 or 20 people will actually start that hit as soon as they get it. And so by launching 25 to 50 hits, you will ensure that you have at least 5 to 10, maybe even up to 15 people who like start the hit immediately as soon as it comes out. And then as those people start finishing their groups, you do another batch of 25 to 50. I think our standard right now is 45 hits per batch. And you just keep launching more and more, keep moving batches as people keep completing the groups. And the people who like reserve those hits early on will eventually take them. But that's how you do groups on Mechanical Turk. You oversubscribe, throw out more hits than you need. And the last thing to sort of know about groups on Mechanical Turk is that Mechanical Turk sort of throws out the last hits in a sort of slow trickle. What they don't want to do is like have 5 hits left, and because it's live and there's a lot of people who are on, show those 5 hits to 20 different people because people are on simultaneously, and then have 20 people sign up for those 5 hits when there's only 5 left. And so Mechanical Turk is very careful about how they throw out the last hits in a batch. So you want to make sure that when you're running at the end, that you essentially, once you have the last data that you need, that you just cut off the last hits. You essentially expire them so that people can't take them. Which, if people have already like started the study, they can still finish. But people who haven't started the study won't be able to start it after you've expired the hits. All right, so that's it. Thank you. If there are any questions, I will take them now. But I will stop the stream.